Four, three, two, one. Welcome to another episode of the Capital Gains Tax Solutions podcast, where we believe most high net worth individuals and those who help them, they struggle with clarifying their capital gains tax deferral options. Not having a clear plan is the enemy, and using a proven tax deferral strategy such as the Deferred Sales Trust is the best way for you to exit highly appreciated businesses, real estate, stock, cryptocurrency, save a failed 1031 exchange so you can create and preserve more wealth or help your clients do the same. Hey, I'm your host, Brett Swarts. In each episode, I'm joined by some of the best real estate, financial, wealth, crypto, and financial minds in the world, where they share their ideas, deal stories, and inspiration. So together we can make complex tax deferral strategies simple and passive income plans achievable. We're also streaming on expert CRE secrets. So for those out there that are listening, we welcome you as well. I'm excited about our next guest. He's the founder and CEO of Harness Wealth. Harness Wealth is on a mission to help make bespoke financial advice accessible, intuitive, and valuable using their holistic wealth platform. It seeks to provide the next generation of builders confidence in the path of their best financial future. Previously, before this gentleman served as the CEO and founder of Harness Wealth, he was the executive in residence at Bain Capital. He was the CEO and CFO of Compass and was responsible for leading the development of operations and finances. He has helped the businesses grow from pre-launch to over $350 million in revenue and raised more than $300 million, valuing the company at $1.8 billion, and so much more. Please welcome to the show with me, David Snider. David, how you doing?
Brett, it's good to be here and on a topic that near and dear to my heart. So thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And for our listeners getting to know you for the first time, would you give us a little bit more about your story and your current focus?
Absolutely. So part of the genesis of Harness was a seven-figure tax loss that I experienced myself. And the irony of all of it was that I actually turned to people who I thought were experts, to HBS professors, in seeking guidance around early stock. And the advice wasn't bad generically, it just wasn't the right advice for my particular situation. And so fast forward a number of years later, having helped Compass through a secondary process and seeing lots of other people that had equity-based compensation and not the right resources to navigate it, started Harness to give people a comprehensive solution, one that brings together digital insights, tax planning and preparation with financial advisory and trust and estate.
Amazing. We're going to be talking about all of that and more. And the topic of today's conversation is the future of wealth management. But before we go there, David, I want to take one other step back. You mentioned before the show you grew up in Boston, and I want you to go back to the high school days or the younger days. I believe we've all been given certain gifts in this life, and these gifts have been given to us to be a blessing and help to others. Some people call them strengths, some people call them superpowers. I'm curious, what are those one or two gifts that you believe you were given, and how does that help how you help and bless people today?
So I was super nerdy, not shocking, in high school, and was co-captain of the debate team. And I think the ability to be constantly curious, but figure out how to break things down into an understandable way to make an argument and how to explain it to people is really compelling. And so I think what has helped me as a leader at Harness is that constant curiosity to find opportunities on behalf of our clients and to write about it, to help make sure that we're bringing the best resources to bear to help people with lots of different situations find the right solutions to optimize for themselves.
Excellent. So being constantly curious and making the complex simple through communication. Is that a fair summary?
I think so.
Fantastic. So let's dive right into the topic, the future of wealth management. So what's the number one secret, David, to the future of wealth management and helping people create and preserve more wealth?
Well, I think there's some macro components to it. I think for the sake of this podcast, since you generally are very tactical, is for people that hold stock in technology companies, biotechnology, and small businesses, is really understanding the nuances of Section 1202 qualified small business stock. It, I think, has become more well-known, certainly, than it was when it first got written into law, but the ability to avoid up to 10 million in capital gains or 50 times your cost basis is probably one of the most valuable tools when it comes to planning from a tax optimization standpoint for people with long-term holdings in a business.
Excellent. So let's walk right through that. It sounds pretty cool, right? And so we have explored this a little bit, but this is good to have you on the show so we can kind of deep dive. So up to 10 million of gains. So let's say I bought a business or started a business, and it's gone up into 10 million of gain. And let's say I have a zero basis, and I'm selling for 10 million, and or you said 50x the cost basis. So break that down and give us the scenario in which this fits, and give us an example.
Sure. So just to extend your concept, you buy a small software business, at a couple $1,000,000 is sort of your entry cost basis. You sell it for, or have the opportunity to sell it 5 years later. Can't be before 5 years to capture the full gain. Up to 50 times the cost basis of the investment, or 10 million, the greater of those two things, is federally tax exempt. And some states like New York, where I'm based, also recognizes it. So you have that same deferral. So for stock sales after 5 years for people that are in those states, it's exempt. California is different, but it's a super powerful tool. And if for some reason, you had that qualifying business, and there's some tests for doing for being qualifying that we can touch base on, you don't get to 5 years, say you sell after 3 years. If you were to find another qualifying opportunity to reinvest in, very similar to the 1031 exchange that you talked about recently, you can reinvest it and defer capital gains. And if that next investment ultimately qualifies both as a business and for that 5-year period, you would pay, no taxes on the outcome.
Okay, let me make sure I got that. So I buy a business for 2 million and I sell it for $12 million. That's a $10 million gain, right? Let's just imagine my basis stayed the same. I'm good. But what if I sold it for 20 million? Would that mean that excess 8 million is still taxable?
It shouldn't, based on that cost basis. So what we more frequently are working with are entrepreneurs who start businesses. They may have a very significant tranche of stock or restricted stock that they inherit. The cost basis is de minimis because they're getting shares at, a fraction of a cent, et cetera. And for those individuals where the cost basis is pretty low, they're maximizing through that 10 million value. But if you're putting up, $1 million, $2 million, it can be a very large capital gain tax exemption, not just deferral.
Okay, so again, you buy it $2 million and you sell it for 50 million, right? So that's more than 10 million. Am I still okay above that because it's still within that 50 times my basis?
You should be.
You should be. Okay, got it. All right, because I wasn't clear on that because you said whichever one was higher, which, okay, yes, that makes sense. So the 50 times the cost basis of 2 is higher, right? So that's cool. And in that scenario, it could be 100 million, right? And it should be good. But if it was 101 million, then only 100 million would qualify. Is that, am I getting the math right there now?
Yep.
Okay, cool. That's awesome. Okay, so you have to hold it for 5 years, the business. So you started it and you held it for more than 5 years, and then you qualify. Then it's those numbers. Now,
and it's also certain types of businesses, just to clarify. So brokerage businesses, manufacturing, certain other types do not qualify as an eligible. A lot of financial services businesses don't as well. So it's worth reading the rules. But what's nice is most big tax firms and law firms have some reading around it so you can see, but it's so valuable that it generally is worth it, when you're potentially making an investment in a business or along that journey of having a report done to confirm that this business, in the eyes of a professional, who can stand by it, qualifies for that, given how much tax avoidance may be possible.
And is it elimination? Is it deferral? Like, because I heard avoidance, that makes me think like
it's elimination if the 5-year threshold is met. If the business qualified, but the sale happens before the 5-year period, there is the opportunity, if it's done within that pretty short time frame, to defer it, but potentially to, again, be exempt from it at the tail end of that reset period. So you can't have like a 3-year hold, sell, reinvest, and then 2 years later qualify. But if you had that 3-year hold, reinvest quickly, and then the next one is 6 years, then you would in fact have realized that full value.
Okay, cool. I mean, it's like, it reminds me a little bit of the 1031 exchange. Definitely some hoops to hop through. Definitely some time frames to consider. Definitely got to hit these numbers. But generally speaking, it's got to qualify. And you said software companies. I'm thinking technology folks, right, that are buying something. Maybe your ideal client buying it
Yep.
too, and then let's imagine they held it for 5 years, so they're already past that, so they're good there. They're selling it for 30 million bucks. They're like, wow, it's a $28 million gain. I don't want to get hammered with 30 to 50% in capital gains tax. I'm going to roll it into this Section 1202 qualified business. What do you call it again? Qualified business stock plan.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Okay.
Qualified small business stock.
Yep. And then at that point, the funds can go where?
And forgive me, I misspoke. It's 10 times the basis of your initial investment, not 50 times. So in
Ah,
that example of
2
two, you're
million.
clear, you're still clear at 20,
Got it.
but you'd have to be, putting in 10 million to be clear all the way up to 100.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay, so it's 10 times or 10 million. Got it. So then once the funds are there, what can you do with the funds?
So if you qualify in the 5 years, then it's just non-tax proceeds essentially.
I can go to my
It's
personal account.
only
I can just cash out and tax free.
That's correct.
Wow. So what businesses qualify for this? That's the most important question, I think, right?
So that there are types of business in terms of like the entity type, and then there's like the nature of the business. So it doesn't work unless it's a C corp. So that's another reason why a lot of small businesses don't ultimately qualify. But most that fall into the scope of things that are um, creating a product, especially doing any type of technology development, et cetera, very broadly, most will qualify.
Okay. So C corp is the first thing. So if I'm setting up a business, C corp, and then number two, um, make sure that maybe you're doing it in a way. What's some strategic ways to make sure you're getting within that threshold? And by the way, it seems kind of odd that it's only for certain businesses. Can you explain why? Is it just incentivizing the government's incentivizing people to start certain types of businesses? Is that the goal here?
It was created early on, yeah, with that idea that it would incentivize business creation, long-term investment in business creation, and hopefully the types of businesses that would generate a lot of jobs. And so that's why I think traditional professional service firms, investment type firms, it was meant to be a vehicle for business creation, job creation, rather than um, a tax gimmick, obviously. And I think very frequently it is a benefit inuring to people that have held for a long period of time, have put up capital in riskier places that have ultimately, proven to be a good outcome. But it ends up benefiting, I think, a broader audience than perhaps. Well, it certainly benefits a lot more people than realize it exists. And so, for the theme of the capital gain, tax solution, certainly making sure that if you did qualify or aware of it is key. I mean, that was part of the mistake that I made where I was given options when I joined Compass. I knew about the advantage of exercising to capture long-term capital gains treatment versus short-term, but I had no idea that as the business grew, we would cross a threshold after which, if you didn't already own the equity in stock, you wouldn't qualify. Because one of the things that we haven't talked about is the business has to have 50 million or less in assets when you acquire the stock. And so if you were to invest in a much later stage business, well north of 50 million of assets, even if you held it for 7 years, it wouldn't qualify. It's got to be that qualified small business, the way that it was written, for it to pay out for you.
It's really fascinating the way they write these rule books, right? And these playbooks, and you're like, this, but that, but not if this, if that, and then it just kind of goes. And so, really interesting. And you learn through the pain, right? I mean, it's similar to my story. I learned through the pain of commercial real estate, 1031 exchanges, and people getting hammered and seeing the blood in the streets, friends, family, and clients losing everything, half, and fighting with the banks. And we identify as a 1031 as the enemy. And had they known about the Deferred Sales Trust and a way to have an alternative, then they perhaps didn't have to feel that pain, right? Or have diversification, liquidity. This is really cool. I really like that you're educating the world with this, and you're living it through. Don't make the mistake that I made not knowing this. And so connect with David Snider, by the way, by going to harnesswealth.com. That's harnesswealth.com. Okay, so I have this business. I set it up as a C corp. I make sure I'm getting loan it for 5 years. It's left in the 50 million, and I'm selling it for. I got it for 2. I'm selling it for 20. I'm super happy. I literally exit, and then it goes to my account. I don't owe any taxes on this thing, and I can just go live my life. I can go buy the boats. I could go travel the world. There's no like kind requirement. There's no like business investment requirement. It's just tax free.
At a federal level, yes. At a state level, it depends, but that would be the case as well if you were in New York, like I am, and likely certainly in states that don't have its own income tax on investment, regardless.
Okay, so you mentioned California maybe as an exception. So is that one of the states where it wouldn't work there? California would want their 13.3.
Yeah, I mean, again, you're saving a ton at the federal level. You're, 24% or whatever it may end up being. But yeah, it is not 100% tax free in the way that it is if you're a New York resident or a Delaware or some other places.
Got it. Okay, cool. Interesting. Yeah. Pros and cons to every strategy, right? I mean, because part of it, you get all that cash, but then some of it you'll pay. So, all right, excellent. So what about estate tax, David? So do you have anything that's created for estate tax? Because that's a big elephant in the room, right? These ultra high net worth individuals that are greater than 22 million married, 12 million single, essentially. Anything above that, it's inside of the taxable states can be subject to that 40% death tax. It has nothing to do with the stepped up basis, nothing to do with capital gains tax. It's completely separate. So what are some creative things that you're seeing for the future of wealth management when it comes to helping estate tax challenges?
Similar theme. I mean, in the private company space, there's often a delta between the 409A valuation of common stock and what might be sort of the preferred value. And I think across the board, moving assets when they're a lower value than what you expect them to be in the future is strategic. And so whether it's a GRAT trust, a SLAT trust, it's creating certain other types of trusts in other states, where there may not be a state income tax in the same way that there, is in your home domiciled state, are all ways of moving assets out in a manner that may ultimately help you, achieve no estate inheritance taxes when you, pass on.
Okay, cool. So let's take a sample. Okay, so I start a business or own cryptocurrency or own a bunch of real estate right now in New York. And I bought it in the 1980s, and I had set up a GRAT or SLAT trust, and I moved it over there early while the value was still maybe 1.5 million. Now it's worth $25 million, right? Something absurd. And in that scenario, it's been outside the taxable estate. So when you say move it, how do you move it without selling it?
Yeah, I mean, it's not particularly hard to move it. I think that there's a distinction that's important. So there are trust structures like the SLAT, which is a spousal trust, which doesn't have its own tax ID. So it doesn't need to file necessarily its own return, et cetera, but it does pull the asset outside of your estate, which is beneficial. There are a different set of trusts that actually are their own legal entity. The reason that you might want to do that is because if you've got this, asset, you can move it at a low cost basis. You're thinking of selling it perhaps, but you don't want to pay New York state tax. You don't need to access those funds. It's really stuff that you want to go to your children or grandchildren. You could move that into a trust that has its own taxpayer ID, is in a different state that doesn't, have those state income taxes. There's still trust returns that you have to file, but that both pulls the asset out of your taxable estate, but it also means that when you sell that asset, it is an asset of a trust that is in whatever state that trust is set up in, which may mean that you're, saving state level taxes upon the sale.
Okay, so let's do a sample of this. Okay, so let's imagine there's a client right now, and I want to do maybe a little side-by-side comparison because we got something called a Deferred Sales Trust Plus, which upon exit of the sale, David, it can go outside the taxable state, no limit on the amount. It works for California, it works for all states. It just works. And now the kids are the beneficiaries, and they can inherit it estate tax free. The client will pay some capital gains tax and some interest along the lifetime based upon the life expectancy of the client. And it might be a little bit, it's interesting because, you have these little nuances for what you're talking about, GRAT and the SLATs and such, but it takes a sale. So it takes a third party buyer who's buying it. So let's do this scenario. The client is married. So they have the 22 million exemption. Let's just use that as the number right now. Although it's adjusted for inflation, it's like 24 right now. But let's say it's 22 million. But they have a $102 million estate, and it's all in real estate, or and they're ready to sell, and they're in their 80s, and they're like, gosh, we're going to be hit with this tax. We don't have any kids, or maybe they have 2 kids that haven't done any gifting. Okay, they don't want to give it away to charity, right? And they're like, David, what can we do to get this 80 million out? How quickly can we get it out? Go.
That sounds like a better scenario for the trust that you just highlighted. I think the ones that I mentioned are much more focused on people that have assets that today have values below that threshold. And it's about how do you maximize the future value of your lifetime exemption by moving things today that might be worth $1 million, but that you expect 10 years from now are going to be worth 25 million. Because there are 2 pieces. One, what do you think the future value is? And then 2, what is a IRS justifiable valuation that you can use when you make the transfer? And so stock in a private company, there are agreed upon known ways of thinking about, what that value ought to be in terms of an appropriate discount for its lack of marketability. That also creates another layer of advantage in terms of moving those types of assets versus moving a liquid security that can be worth, 5 million in that 100 million portfolio, where you're moving something at its true and expected, future value.
Okay, so I'm thinking like this. So if I'm getting to the plate, I'm about to swing the bat or, get on base. I want to get with David to potentially move stuff out now that I think is going to be a potential home run when I'm running around the bases in a couple of years, right? Although if you're coming around third, right, and you're about to, and you're about to hit the home run and you hadn't set that up, perhaps you want to get with me so we can set up the Deferred Sales Trust Plus, and we can have that buyer buy that $80 million asset and move it outside the taxable estate. David, I'm curious, right? Because a lot of these things, and I get approached every day, people go, that sounds crazy, Brett. Never heard of it. I mean, I've been working with David Snider for years. Maybe he's never heard of it, right? Or whatever. You probably get it with the qualified, 1202 business stock plan, right? So what's your feedback or thoughts for those that are listening? It sounds like what they're saying is either too good to be true, or my CPA would have known about this and told me. I work with the best, David. Like, can you give us some feedback on that?
I mean, it sounds like we've both lived the examples that sort of disprove that mentality. I think that the U.S. tax code is one of the longest documents in the world. And so it's unfair to assume that any professional knows all the nuances of, cost segregation and deferral strategies if you own real estate, and are also to understand all the nuances of, private company tech stock and the best way to do things there. And so I think a lot of the stuff that we've covered today is so valuable for those that it benefits, that it is worth making sure that you're engaging in the conversations if they're assets that may apply to. In a lot of cases, I think you can do the research without spending any money. If you want to have the consultation with someone, you can do it in a way where the ROI is unbelievably high to figure it out, whether it's for that asset you have today, or it's giving you a new perspective on something you may be investing in or doing 2 to 5 years from now that unlocks a 7 or 8 figure incremental value for you or your family.
I couldn't agree more. This is David Snider, and he's with harnesswealth.com. It's harnesswealth.com. He's in the New York area and Soho area of New York. And I couldn't agree with you more, David. And it's part of why it's so fascinating. I think why I'm attracted to it. I don't know if you relate with this, that it's something that's so transformational and so amazing. A part of this $32 trillion wealth transfer of the baby boomers, right, is what's going on right now in the next 20 years. Plus, is 2 to 3 trillion in cryptocurrency, people looking to exit tax deferred in different ways. And this amount of wealth is either going to go into the hands of the government, right? A lot of it, or it's going to be the hands of the people, right? And it's this battle for, the wealth of the world, the largest wealth transfer in the history of the planet. 10,000 baby boomers turning 65 every day. And then U.S., there's 77 million in the U.S. alone. And to be on the front lines, to be able to offer something that can give this freedom for families to create more jobs, more businesses, invest, give to charity should they want to, all of these different things, versus in the hands of a government, which I know in New York and California, we might be at the worst as far as managing money, right? So what are your thoughts and feedback on that comment I just had right there?
Yeah, I would say I'm probably a little bit more progressive politically than it sounds like that you may be. I think that whatever federal dollars going to support Ukraine is an example of like something only a government, especially on a military standpoint, can do. And so I'm definitely not averse to all taxes, but I do think that what's important is leveling the playing field, that the strategies that people who are second or third generation wealth are able to deploy because they have the time and resources to understand it and the teams around them, that everyone that these apply to should be able to understand what exists out there, make their own choices around optimization, et cetera. I mean, a friend of mine used to work for a billionaire who was thinking about moving to Puerto Rico. And like that blew my mind in the sense that, yes, there is a massive tax savings if you live in Puerto Rico versus living in the contiguous, 50 US states, but you're living in Puerto Rico. And if that's what you want to do, great. But like part of the value of making a lot of wealth is unlocking freedom for yourself and for those as well. And so I'm not a reduce taxes at any cost type of person, not having the tail wag the dog. But if there are ways that with the assets that you have, the decisions you're making, you can understand the nuances of how to best optimize to reach your goals and the independence that you want, that's a great value and I think a great service to offer.
Absolutely love it. Yeah, I think that's great. Right, I think level the playing field, and I love just giving the client options. Right, part of why we have capital gains tax solutions with an S plurals because it's not just one. Right, so we want to bring on people like David because there's different solutions for different folks, and there's different professionals who offer those things. And so and I encourage me and you and anyone else who's listening to this is to find out, clarify your wealth plan, clarify your future, clarify your legacy, clarify all those things you're trying to accomplish, and find out which option or which solution or which part of the tax code can help you achieve that outcome for you and your family, and in a tax efficient way. And I've also heard a saying, David, you can always pay more on your taxes, right? Like you get the tax bill, you can always make a donation to the government. I say that tongue in cheek, right? Because again, California, sometimes I feel like, if we could hold them a little more accountable, have a little more transparency, right? Because you're right. I don't think I have a problem paying the taxes. I have a problem with when the taxes are paid with how the people are managing the money, right? And what's resourceful, what's being good stewards with it. And those are the challenges where you feel like if it was coming to the more local, where you could hold the people accountable, you wouldn't feel so distance from it. And so, but
Sure.
that's a whole nother podcast that we could have. But that being said, are you ready for the lightning? Because we're running out of time.
Let's do it.
All right. Knowing what you know now, if you go back to your 25-year-old self, what's the one golden nugget you'd make sure to tell yourself to do?
I think the QSBS one was probably worthwhile, given that was certainly the most valuable nugget that was missed early on.
It's probably what drives you every day, right? It's one of the things that you're just thinking like, that is it. Like if someone would have told me, man, gosh. Yeah, I hear you. Second question. What's the number one book you've recommended or gifted the most in the past year?
The Hard Thing About Hard Things, which is written by one of the two Andreessen Horowitz founders, I think is the best perspective on the grind, but also sort of the opportunity in building technology businesses.
Fascinating. I haven't heard that one yet. I want to check it out. Question number 3, what's your number one leadership quote or theme that you strive to live by?
I think the theme, and I tell this a lot to the advisors that are part of our platform, is the more that you can tell people what's going to happen, the more trust that you're going to build. And obviously no one knows the exact future, but I remember getting the advice from a mentor of mine who's the CFO of a public company. And he said, when he was taking the business public, he told all the employees, listen, I know for a fact that our stock is going to it will move 50% in the first 12 months after we go public. I just don't know whether it's going to be up or down. And I strongly encourage you not to track it day by day, because I know the fundamentals of the business and we're going to do well over time. And I think that mentality in giving people a sense that like, hey, there's going to be volatility, but we're going to be okay. Or, here's what's going to happen when you start a business. These are things that you should be thinking about that inevitably are going to pop up. You build immense trust, whether you're an advisor or just a friend and a peer to someone.
Yeah, I can't help but connect that quote with what you're doing every day, right? Especially with the 1202 here. the more you can tell people what's going to happen, the more you're going to build trust. And also the more you're going to pay perhaps defer some tax or eliminate some tax, right? That's pretty cool. Second to last question, what are you most curious about right now?
Right now, I think, I'm like a lot of people in terms of understanding what is ultimately going to happen in terms of the expansion of digital assets as part of the financial ecosystem. We help a number of people who that's core to their wealth generation, others that it's sort of tangential to it. But I think understanding the longer term implications of it is fascinating.
Absolutely. And last question, David. After all your success helping lots of people create and preserve more wealth, selling your positions and having to pay a bunch of tax, all the stuff that you've accumulated to this point, how do you stay centered? What's the habit that you practice to stay centered in your values? And how do you stay encouraged to charge forward to reach for new heights?
It's very easy, I think, to reset what your goals are in a way that drives you crazy because you're, constantly striving for something else. And so I try to, every 10 years or so to write out goals that are really important and to celebrate those that are achieved. And that doesn't mean you shouldn't be constantly ambitious, but trying to make sure that when stuff that really mattered to you gets done, that you acknowledge that before just moving the goalpost on yourself.
Amazing. David, I want to thank you for being on the show. I want to thank you for using your gifts of curiosity and making something complex simple and communicating that in a very straightforward, intriguing, inspiring way. I want to encourage you to keep using those gifts to be a blessing and help to others. For our listeners who want to get in touch with you, would you remind them one last time what's the best place for them to connect with you?
Harnesswealth.com if any of the sort of types of service that we talked about is beneficial. And I'm on Twitter as David Snider, HW as well.
And that's SNIDER, by the way. David Snider, thanks for being on the show. And I also want to thank our listeners for listening to another episode of the Capital Gains Tax Solutions podcast, where we believe most high net worth individuals and those who help them, they struggle with clarifying their capital gains tax deferral options, and not having a clear plan is the enemy. And using a proven tax deferral strategy, such as the Deferred Sales Trust or such as the 1202 Qualified Small Business Stock Plan, with a guy like David Snider to help you execute this, who's been through the fire himself and wants to make sure that you don't have to go through some of that same pain that he faced with the tax, is a great way to help you create and preserve more wealth, or help your clients, friends, and family do the same. If we can help you at all, please go to capitalgainstaxsolutions.com. Check out our free mastermind. It's the Crypto DST Mastermind. We're helping people exit crypto, businesses, real estate, defer the capital gains tax, diversify their wealth, move funds outside their taxable estate, all those really fun, cool things. And you can also check out the new book that's coming out, Building a Tax-Deferred Exit Strategy. We have a guy named Kevin Harrington from Shark Tank who's a part of the book, which is pretty cool, and other really, really smart people like David Snider that are in the book. Maybe on the second book, I can have David in there as a chapter. We'll see if he would be up for that. But you can go to capitalgainstaxsolutions.com to get your Deferred Sales Trust started today. Register for the mastermind. Check out the book when it releases. Thank you so much for watching.